I stepped into the kitchen just as the laughter erupted. It wasn't the soft kind, the kind that rises from joy or memory. It was sharp, loud, like something mean had just been said. And I was right. "She talks too much anyway," my son said. Jen taught her some respect with the back of her hand. I didn't freeze. I didn't drop the platter I was carrying. I just kept walking. They hadn't seen me yet, and part of me wished they wouldn't. Maybe I could place the food down and slip away before anyone remembered whose birthday they were here for. But then someone turned, and the silence came fast. They didn't rush to apologize. No one gasped or said, "That's not funny." They just quieted, like someone had unplugged the room. I walked past the stairs, past my son, who now avoided my eyes, past Jen, who looked satisfied, like she'd gotten the last word, and I placed the tray of rolls down on the table I bought 23 years ago. The table I used to oil by hand, back when family dinners meant something. My cheek still throbbed where she'd hit me 2 days ago. I'd told no one, but they knew. My face gave it away, swollen and purpling just under my right eye. Jen saw me look at her, raised her glass anyway. "To tough love," she said. Some people chuckled, mostly on her side of the family. My son didn't laugh this time. But he didn't speak either. I pulled out a chair for myself, none had been offered, and sat. I smoothed my skirt, set my napkin on my lap. No one poured me a drink. No one passed the bread. I looked around the table, my house, my food, my birthday. Yet somehow I'd become the stranger. The cake I made sat untouched on the counter behind them, starting to soften at the edges under the kitchen lights. The cake was beginning to droop at the edges, the frosting softening under the kitchen light. I'd made it that morning the same way I had every year, scratch batter, real butter, hand-whipped cream. I still remembered the year my son first licked the beater and declared it the best thing I'd ever made. He was 7. He used to ask for it on every birthday. Now he stood by the sink, chatting with Jen's cousin about lawn chairs. People passed the cake as if it were invisible. They reached for the store-bought cookies Jen had piled on a silver tray, frosted sugar ones with plastic wrapping still peeking from beneath the plate. I waited until the room thinned out a bit, then stood and walked toward the counter. My hand had barely touched the knife when Jen appeared beside me. "Let the guests eat first," she said quietly, smiling in case anyone was watching. "You're always trying to control everything." Control? That was the word she liked to use now. Not care. Not help. Control. I stepped back, wordless. The knife stayed in its place, clean and unused. Back at the table, someone knocked over a glass of lemonade. No one offered me a towel. I sat again, folding my hands in my lap, like a child waiting for permission. My house was filled with people, but I had never felt more unwanted. Every movement I made was a disruption, every word an intrusion. They joked about things I didn't recognize, cryptocurrency TikTok flights to Cabo. Someone mentioned how the old woman across the street still mowed her own lawn, and everyone laughed. My son didn't look at me. He only laughed along. The cake was still untouched. I let the knife stay where it was. I'd lost my appetite anyway. As voices rose around me, I pushed my chair back quietly and walked toward the stairs that led down to the garage. No one asked where I was going when I slipped away. No one noticed. They were too busy refilling drinks and retelling the same tired jokes that had somehow become tradition without me. I carried a small slice of cake on a paper plate, holding it steady as I descended the steps. It felt strange sneaking food in my own house like a tenant afraid of being caught. The garage was cool and dim, lit by a single bulb that buzzed when the fridge kicked on. I placed the plate on the folding table beside the cot and sank down slowly. The cot creaked under me, thin and low to the ground, its metal frame bowing under years of wear. I'd slept here for months now, Not because I wanted to, but because Jen's sister had needed the guest room for a while and then simply never left. At first, I'd told myself it was temporary, that I was being accommodating, that it was still my home even if I gave up a little space. But somehow, each concession became permanent. And with every one, I shrank further from the life I used to live upstairs. I pulled the blanket over my knees and sat there listening. Above me, the floorboards groaned with footsteps. Someone laughed, my son, maybe. Or Jen. Their voices filtered through the ceiling as muffled echoes far away and full of something I no longer understood. I reached for the fork, but paused. The cake had gone warm. The frosting stuck to the plate. I didn't want it anymore. Instead, I sat still. Quiet. Wrapped in cotton sheets that smelled faintly of laundry soap and dust. My eye throbbed where the bruise had settled deep. No one came down to check on me. No one called my name. The party went on above me, light and loud, untouched by the weight of what had been said. I didn't sleep. I just waited for the house to go quiet. When it finally did, I reached under the cot and pulled out the envelope I hadn't touched in years. The envelope was right where I'd left it, tucked beneath a folded blanket, in an old plastic tub under the cot. I pulled it out with both hands, careful not to tear the brittle paper. The edges were soft with age, but the contents inside were still sharp. I opened it slowly and spread everything across the garage workbench, the original deed, with my name, the trust agreement I'd created with Carl before he passed, and the bank statements each with my signature, anchoring the bottom line. They had no idea. My son walked around this house like it belonged to him. Jen handed out orders as if she were doing me a favor by letting me stay. Neither of them ever asked. They assumed, because I never told them otherwise. I suppose I thought that was love, letting them feel powerful, letting them believe they were building something of their own when all they were doing was standing on ground I paid for. The trust hadn't changed since Carl died. He'd insisted on keeping the structure tight, clean, protected, in case they ever forget he had said. Not to punish, but to remind. I hadn't wanted to believe we'd ever need it. I flipped through each page, my fingers steady. I hadn't read them in a long time, but nothing had changed. The house was still mine. The money still safe. The authority still sitting in the hands of the woman sleeping on a cot in the garage. They thought I was powerless because I stayed quiet, because I didn't argue when Jen moved my things, because I didn't raise my voice when he laughed about my bruised face, because I disappeared from the living room and said nothing when no one followed. But I hadn't disappeared. I had been watching, waiting. I gathered the papers, returned them to the envelope, and placed it back in the drawer beneath the toolbox. Tomorrow, I'd take the first step. I just didn't know yet what it would look like until I heard the knock at the door. The knock startled me. It was late morning, the kind of quiet hour when the house above me was empty. Jen at her Pilates class, my son at work. I hesitated before opening the door, expecting another delivery, or one of Jen's friends asking to borrow something that was still technically mine. But it was Lorna. She stood on the step with a pie dish in her hands, wrapped in foil, her smile small and uncertain. I heard what Jen said the other night, she murmured. I didn't want to intrude, but, "Are you all right?" I stepped aside to let her in. The garage smelled faintly of detergent and concrete. She looked around, taking in the cot, the single lamp, the boxes stacked along the wall. She didn't comment. She didn't need to. I waved toward the workbench. "It's not much, but there's coffee." She placed the pie down and folded her hands in front of her. "You told me last year you still held the title to this house just in case. Remember?" I blinked at her. I had said that once offhand, back when Jen had first moved in and started rearranging furniture without asking. I'd said it as a joke almost. But hearing it now from someone else's mouth gave it a different weight. I'd planned for survival without realizing it, and then I'd forgotten I ever had. Lorna's eyes softened. "You don't deserve to live like this, Morel." I looked down at my hands. Deserve doesn't change much. No, she said gently. But action does. When she left, the garage felt colder, quieter. I sat on the cot and stared at the workbench drawer where the envelope waited. She was right. I'd spent too long believing endurance was the same as peace. The clock ticked softly against the concrete wall. Upstairs, I heard a car pull into the driveway. Jen's engine sharp and impatient. I stood, brushed my hands against my skirt, and opened the drawer once more. They came in a pack, Jen's cousins from out-of-state trailing luggage, and loud stories trailing perfumes that didn't belong to this house. No one had mentioned they were coming. No one had asked if it was all right. I heard them first stomping up the steps, laughter bouncing down the hallway. Then the door slammed, and Jen called out for takeout menus. My son followed behind them, smiling like a host at a party. When I stepped upstairs, they were already on the living room couch, my couch. Shoes on the cushions, drinks balanced on the armrests. Someone had moved my vase to the floor to make room for their plastic bags. I stood in the doorway. No one moved. Garage still yours, my son said over his shoulder, not even turning around. Hope you're comfortable. I didn't reply. Just stepped farther into the room slowly and glanced down at the rug beneath their feet. It was woven by hand. A gift from my sister before she passed. Still in perfect condition until now. Be careful with the rug, I said quietly. It's worth more than your car. They laughed, loud and fast. The kind of laugh that fills a space with disrespect. I didn't. I looked each of them in the eye one by one until the room began to still. My son glanced at me unsure for the first time in months. I turned and walked back toward the stairs. In the garage, I picked up my phone. I hadn't called this number in over a year, not since the last tax season ended, and I promised myself I wouldn't need a lawyer again. But the voice on the other end still remembered me. Mrs. Dawson, he said warmly. I was wondering when you'd call. I'm ready, I said, to move forward. Quietly. We set a time. We made a plan. And the next morning, I printed out every document and put them in a neat folder beside the door. The lawyer's office was colder than I remembered. Sterile quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't wait for anyone to speak first. I sat across from him at the long glass table, the folder of documents open between us. He slid the first paper toward me, tapping where I needed to sign. You've reviewed everything I have, and you're ready. I nodded once. My name flowed from the pen in smooth, practiced strokes, over and over again. On the deed transfer, on the trust amendments, on the final directive removing my son as secondary beneficiary. With each signature, the weight in my chest began to shift lighter, not from relief, but from control, returning to my hands. I had waited so long to be heard. Now I didn't need anyone to listen. The documents would speak for me. The house will be listed this Friday, he said, sliding the papers back into a binder. Do you want them notified formally, or will the realtor handle that? Let the realtor do it? He nodded. They'll be served a notice. 60 days to vacate. I imagined Jen's face, her voice rising, my son trying to reason, or worse, begging. But it didn't change anything. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was doing it because they believed I'd always stay quiet. The bank accounts were next. New ones in my name only. No co-signers, no shared access. The lawyer had brought a notary in, and I watched her stamp each page with quiet efficiency. This will trigger an alert in their shared access, he said. They may notice by Monday. That's fine. It was strange how calm I felt. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. By the time I walked out of the office, the wind had picked up outside, cool and steady. I held my purse tighter and made my way back to the car. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I stopped by the grocery store and bought a small roast carrots and potatoes. The envelope arrived mid-morning. I heard Jen's heels clicking down the hallway, before the sound stopped abruptly at the front door. A pause, then the sharp tear of paper, followed by silence. And then she screamed. I didn't rush up. I folded my laundry first, laid the towels neatly on the cot, then made my way upstairs. Jen was standing in the middle of the kitchen, the notice in her hand, her mouth opening and closing without words. My son was next to her, blinking like he'd just woken up in someone else's life. "What is this?" she snapped, waving the letter in the air. "What do you mean this house is being sold?" I stepped fully into the room and glanced at the paper. Exactly what it says. "You can't be serious," my son said. "This is some mistake. You can't just kick us out." I looked at him, not cruelly, not angrily, just clearly. "I'm not." I took a breath. "The new owners will." Jen dropped the letter on the counter like it had burned her. My son reached for it, flipping pages, scanning words he didn't understand fast enough. "You said we'd always have a place here," he muttered. "You said this house was for the family." I nodded. I did. And then the family stopped being a place I belonged. The clock ticked behind them. Neither spoke. I turned toward the fridge, opened it and pulled out the roast I'd marinated the night before. "You'll have 60 days, I said, setting it on the counter. "That's more than enough." Jen opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. The words had gone just like the entitlement. I sliced the vegetables calmly while they stood frozen behind me. The oven beeped. I preheated it. The carrots hit the cutting board with clean, even knocks. I didn't ask them to leave the kitchen. But after a minute, they both did. By the time the roast was in the oven, the house had gone completely silent. They left on a Wednesday. Early. A moving truck in the driveway, before sunrise doors, banging footsteps, fast and sharp across the floor. I stayed in the garage until I heard the engine pull away. No goodbye. No apology. I waited a full hour before I came upstairs. Not because I was afraid, just because I wanted the air to settle. When I opened the front door, the house felt lighter. Not empty, not hollow, just freed, like it had finally exhaled after holding its breath for far too long. I moved through each room slowly, touching nothing, just taking it all in. The guest room, Jen's sister's old haven, was stripped bare. The only thing left behind was a chipped mug on the windowsill. I left it there. The living room still smelled faintly like her perfume. A scent I never liked but always tolerated. I opened a window and let it drift out. The kitchen was cleaner than usual. Too clean, as if trying to erase something. But the dent in the corner of the fridge I'd owned since 2002 was still there, and so was the way the cabinet under the sink stuck when it got humid. Some things didn't go quietly. I didn't need much. I packed 2 suitcases, clothes, a few photos, my old recipe box, the tiny carved bird from Carl that used to sit on the windowsill before Jen moved it to a drawer. The rest I left, not out of spite, just because I didn't want to carry it anymore. I walked room to room, switching off lights as I went, my fingers brushing along the wall as if saying a soft goodbye to each corner. When I stepped out the front door for the last time, I didn't look back. My new place wasn't big, but it was waiting. And this time, no one would be there to decide where I could or couldn't sleep. The new house sat at the end of a quiet street. Just 2 bedrooms, a narrow porch, and a kitchen that fit one person comfortably, if they didn't mind bumping into the fridge now and then. It was perfect. I spent the first week with a paintbrush in my hand. Pale cream for the walls, soft gray for the trim. I didn't ask if anyone liked it. I didn't have to explain why I chose those colors. I hung a framed photo of Carl by the entryway, just above a small shelf for keys and mail. In the kitchen, I lined up the mugs exactly how I liked them. Handles turned out neat, even familiar. No one came behind me to rearrange them. I ate when I was hungry, not when someone decided it was convenient. I left the porch light on as late as I wanted. I turned the music up while cooking and sang along badly without anyone smirking behind a phone screen. Some nights were quiet, and the silence pressed in, but not the kind that hurts. It was the kind that made room. Room to breathe. Room to rest. Room to become something again. I unpacked slowly, a drawer at a time. The old recipe box found its place beside the stove. The little carved bird sat on the windowsill again, exactly where it used to be. This time, no one moved it. There were no arguments about thermostat settings, no sharp glances when I asked questions, no sidelong comments about how I loaded the dishwasher. It wasn't about comfort, not entirely. It was about space. Mine. Every inch of it. One afternoon, I stood in the doorway of the spare room, the one with light that hit just right in the morning, and thought maybe I'd set up a sewing table there. Maybe a chair by the window. Not because I needed it, just because I could. I stepped back into the living room, took a seat in the armchair. I'd picked out myself and opened a book I hadn't touched in years. No one interrupted.